Welcome to TrulyFit, the online fitness marketplace connecting pros and clients through unique fitness business software.
Joe, thanks for joining the TrulyFit Podcast. Why don't you give the listeners and the audience a background and bio on who you are, your credentials, and what you do in health and fitness?
Sure. First off, thanks for having me. My name is Joe Orbaczewski. I am a licensed physical therapist. I've been practicing for almost 8 years at this point. I'm also a certified strength and conditioning specialist and a TPI certified professional. And basically I work with golfers and other folks as well, mostly CrossFit athletes at this time. But I mainly work with golfers and work on helping them get over injuries, but also improve their performance on and off the golf course.
Can I ask why you chose that niche? Were you in an area where there were a lot of golfers? Are you a former golfer? How'd you get into that?
Yeah, I just really enjoy the game of golf. I play myself. I'm definitely by no means great whatsoever, but I played in high school. My dad would always take me to the driving range, but he never played golf. And then I was over a friend's house, and he had a big retention basin behind his house, and we were just hitting some balls. And he was on the golf team, and he was like, "You're pretty good. You should come out for the golf team." And so I did, and I was on the golf team basically, and then continued to play throughout as I got older. But kind of dwindled a little bit. As I was in college, because it wasn't one as popular as it is now for college age kids to play golf, and two, just was too focused on getting into grad school at the time. But still love the game, and I just love the challenge of you're never going to be perfect, and it's always something different every time you play.
Yeah, that's certainly the case. And I'm quite jealous that you started young. For anyone who starts young, I think, and you could probably speak to this too, just the sort of the muscle memories or the neural connections, the patterns you build. It's just such an advantage to start young. I mean, if you put a football in my hand and I haven't thrown one in 10 years, I can still throw a perfect spiral 40 yards down the field. And I'm sure that's the same with a golfer. Someone who's golfed from 6 to 18 can take off for 10 years. You put a club in their hand and they're still striking fantastically. And it's such an advantage.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. I've seen folks who haven't played for years, and then they go out and play, and they're a little rusty, but they're still playing well.
So together, I think we'll do this. I'll throw it to you first to start, and I'll add anything. Let's explain for the audience who doesn't otherwise know. My typical avatar, I guess you would say, is just personal trainers, people in the fitness industry, group fitness instructors, things of that nature. There are some, there are a plethora of listeners who are just general population too. But why exactly is golf fitness important? From the layman's perspective, they might look at golf fitness and say, you don't need to be in that good of shape for golf. Like, why is golf fitness important?
Yeah, I think you could see, if anyone follows along the PGA Tour, even LPGA Tour, most of these golfers now that are out there, especially the young golfers who, is changing the face of what an athlete who is a golfer looks like, are in shape and they're working out, and it's part of their everyday routine, basically. I'm sure most people, if they follow along, know Bryson DeChambeau. He's kind of led the pack and has kind of really changed the face of things, and has created a little bit of controversy with what he's been doing. But I think if we look at it as also the golfer that we're mainly going to be working with, which is the amateur golfer, the everyday person who maybe plays on the weekends, may get a round in every once or twice during the week, but maybe hit the range again during the week. Your normal person that's probably working an office job, sitting a lot, may not have a lot of time to work out. And for them to just continuously go pound balls and not have some sort of, mobility work or strength work or any of those kinds of things, they're just asking for maybe potentially an injury to occur, and then them just stopping playing. And if anyone else, besides that too, just to improve your performance, golf fitness is a huge thing. Most golfers that I know always want to be better at golf. And I think some of the lowest hanging fruit that people are missing, besides, having a good technical swing, are, mobility, getting stronger, getting faster, those kinds of things. And unfortunately, so many times they just reach for the newest ball that comes out or the newest clubs and those kinds of things, and hoping that will fix their swing when ultimately it's most likely not.
Yeah, I have to echo those thoughts. And I think for trainers, this is a good pitch that you can give to potential clients who are golfers who are thinking about getting into fitness or not, to say, how much money have you spent on brand new clubs over the past, whatever, 5 years? How many sets have you bought? How many times have you seen this infomercial with a orange ball on a stick that you bought at 1 a.m. because you thought it was going to improve your golf skill set, right? How many private lessons did you have? How many putts have you hit, right? You have all these different, I call them like branches off the golf tree, but the one that's missing typically is the fitness. And whether that is, we'll get into this down the road, it's not always strength, right? It could also be flexibility, or like you mentioned, injury prevention, which is just as important. So I want to kind of start from there. I want to start with the movement pattern of golf. So the golf swing, different than most other swings. Obviously, somewhat similar to baseball, but as older adults, not much of us play baseball anymore. Maybe softball. But what are the muscles that we should be most concerned with? And again, this is a personal training audience, so you can speak and use specifics.
Yeah. So the golf swing, as you had alluded to, is very similar to a baseball swing. I also, related to a hockey player or a tennis player, some sort of rotational athlete who's rotating around an axis, basically. So it's a full body sport. There's a lot of things involved, but I think in terms of mobility, the main areas that I look at in terms of a rotational aspect include the neck, the shoulders, the mid back, and the hips. Those are your prime kind of rotational centers. Again, there are a couple of other areas that you need to have a good amount of mobility in, but those are probably the main drivers that I see are usually limited in most folks. And then when it comes to what I look at in terms of strength, it's definitely the legs and the lower body, particularly the glutes. The core is another really big aspect in the golf swing and transferring energy from the ground to the upper body and, ultimately the club. And then the lats and the chest actually play a very big role in strength and power in the golf swing. So those are like the true main areas that I'm looking at. Of course, it's not always the case, and it's a whole body kind of experience, of course. But those are the main areas to definitely look at for sure.
Okay, well, let's take that next step. So let's sort of walk the audience through. I come in and I say, hey, Joe, I'm a golfer and, my game sucks lately. I don't know what's going on. I want you to sort of assess me from head to toe, not necessarily my swing, but my physical prowess or my potential ailments of what's going on. What are you looking for?
Right. So I'll normally take people through a TPI assessment, which is Titleist Performance Institute assessment. And that's just a screen. If anyone's familiar with like the FMS, SFMA, they're all the same guys, all the same kind of thinking for the most part. And basically what that allows me to do is go a little bit deeper into certain areas from what I see. So I take my physical therapy lens, and take a look maybe at joint mobility, certain things, if someone's limited in the neck or the shoulders or hips or something along those lines. But like I said, we're going to go through and look at your mobility and stability throughout your entire body. So we're going to go through the assessment, that screen, to kind of dig a little bit deeper, and then I'll go from there. And then I like to include some other assessments as well. So I look at swing speed. I actually do have them hit and record their swing. I don't talk to them about fixing their swing or changing anything in it, but I relate it to any of the physical findings we find on the screen and how they might be related and why they're causing X, Y, and Z potentially. And then I also go through and look at some various strength and power assessments. So we'll do like a seated medicine ball chest pass to look at kind of upper body pushing, power, and strength. And then we'll do like a rotational med ball throw as well to kind of look at just kind of lower body rotation, power. And then also a vertical jump is what I like to look at, because all of those things kind of play a role in the golf swing. Since it is a power sport, you're only swinging for less than 2 seconds. So really looking at power and force output, and then kind of talk to them about kind of what we see. And those are all really great numbers to have, because you can directly affect those with your training that you're going to do with that person.
I see a lot of the TPI professionals sort of do exercises that separate the thoracic rotation from maybe the lower body rotation, whether they're sitting on like a Swiss ball of some sort. Is there a reason why? Is that how you go about it, or do you do it differently?
Yeah, so in that screen, there are a couple of tests that look at not only your hip and lower body rotation and mobility, but can you also stabilize your body while another part is rotating? If you don't have that ability to stabilize while another part is rotating, that can just cause some issues in the swing and kind of create, various swing characteristics, which are not necessarily a bad thing, but can contribute to inconsistencies in the swing. And so if someone's limited in their thoracic mobility, we'll just say, is it truly a mobility limitation because they're stiff through their thoracic spine or the ribs or something along those lines? Or is it just the sheer fact that they can't disassociate their upper body from their lower body? Both of those will require, different things in terms of interventions for that golfer.
Yeah, that's a lot to look at. I'm glad you have to do it, not me. I'm a corrective exercise specialist. I don't enjoy it. I don't like doing it because I'm also a contrarian, and I can always see why maybe it is the knee causing the hip issue or the hip causing the knee issue. And everyone seems so sure why it's one thing over another. So I know that's probably a difficult part of your job, is to say like, no, this is definitely the reason. And this is causing X, Y, and Z chain of events.
Right. I mean, one of the biggest things that most golfers, including myself, deal with is like one swing characteristic is early extension. So if you're filming a golfer from behind and watching them like behind their swing, so you can see where they're aiming. And early extension is when the hips thrust towards the ball during the downswing. Ideally, you should be able to maintain in that kind of athletic position, kind of squat posture throughout the swing until, you're following all the way through and you hit through impact. If you come out of that position, a lot of times is because you have a rotational deficit. One of the biggest missed things is people think they're lacking trunk rotation, but in reality, they can't turn their trunk anymore because their neck is stiff, because you need to have almost 90 degrees of rotation this way. But if you can't turn this way, you automatically think it's a torso problem, but in reality, it could be a neck problem causing that. So again, trying to tease that out is really important.
Yeah. So let's get away from the specifics and then go back to the general here. What are some exercises that any golfer can do, regardless of age or ability, that you believe can help them and help their game?
Sure. I think number one thing, and I hope most fitness professionals will agree with me, that the best exercise that anyone can do, I think hands down, is a deadlift, essentially. You can never go wrong with a deadlift. It gets so many things at once and is huge for getting strong, especially in the lower body, even the upper body, right? So that is a big one. And I like it because with like with any exercise, there's a ton of different variations and modifications that you can make for the person in front of you. So definitely a deadlift is huge. I'm one of the big believers in kind of the main movements. So like a hip dominant. So again, a deadlift, or knee dominant, whether that's some sort of variation of a squat. Again, horizontal pushing. So any kind of chest work, and horizontal and vertical kind of pulling. So any kind of lat work. So pull-ups, rows. I'm a big believer in those big compound movements first, and then you can start to dial in some of those more isolated, quote unquote, kind of like sexy exercises you might see on Instagram or something along those lines. But I'm a big believer in all those. And then core. And I like a lot of anti movements. So whether that's anti-extension or anti-rotation, anti-lateral flexion. So carries, any kind of like pal-off press variation or some sort of chop is always great with a cable or a band.
So speaking to that, are you using typically more of the band cable type equipment to do these exercises? Because obviously whether it's rotation or anti-rotation, it's using those pieces of equipment, you can replicate the golf swing or rotational movements better than you can, let's say, a weight or a kettlebell.
Right. I would say I'm not necessarily trying to replicate the golf swing a lot of times. I think with some moves you do, but not every time. Most of the movements that you're doing, again, those big, very foundational movements, lunges, deadlifts, squats, all the kind of upper body work as well, are all very foundational and will translate to the swing regardless, even if it doesn't look like a golf swing. So I'll use whatever is available. I'm a big fan of free weights because they challenge you in different ways than obviously cables or bands do. But I'll also try to do things as to whatever the person has in front of me. So if they're going to have access to certain things at their home in between our sessions, and that's just bands a lot of the times, I'll do a lot of cable and band work with them so that they feel comfortable with those exercises at home. But I will still try to get some free weight work in as well, because I think that that's beneficial and will also be a different stimulus for them.
what are common golf injuries? And we don't have to speak to professionals, but your everyday average person, what should they be concerned with, and what do you see?
The most common thing I see is low back pain, and I mean there could be a myriad of reasons as why someone has low back pain. Behind that is probably some sort of wrist elbow issue. A lot of times that could be like golfer's elbow or tennis elbow, and those are probably the biggest things that I would see. You do get the occasional knee pain or shoulder pain. I tend to question if that's caused from golf or not from golf. But a lot of times low back pain and wrist elbow issues are the big causes. So low back pain, again, can be caused by a lot of reasons. It's hard to say exactly one thing, right? But oftentimes when it comes to the golf swing, if you're limited in hip mobility or mid back mobility, you end up robbing somewhere else basically. So you can rotate because your body's going to do whatever you're asking it to do. And so if you're limited again in your mid back or your hips, a lot of times you'll end up rotating through your lower back, which is supposed to be relatively stable throughout the swing and not really rotating. And then when it comes to wrist and elbow injuries, either they end up hitting something, whether it's a rock and they didn't know, or they hit a tree root or something like that, or it's just a lot of repetition. I usually see a lot of like elbow wrist stuff at the beginning of the season because most grass driving ranges aren't open yet. So a lot of people will be hitting off of mats and whatnot. And unfortunately, the mat is not as forgiving as the actual ground is. Like you won't make a divot on a mat, right? And so you just have that repetitive force through the club up through your hand and your arm. And ultimately that can, if you're having some issues or underlying issues and you go out and you hit 200 balls like most golfers do initially because they're so excited that the season's starting, it just becomes overload and your body can't handle that stress.
Yeah, that makes sense. I want to go back to something you said before about potentially shoulder or other injuries that you don't necessarily associate with golf. And I'm just going to pick at that. Did you say that because you have clients a lot of times that come to you with an injury, they sort of self-diagnose where the injury came from, but you don't believe that came from that? And one last caveat before you answer that. The reason I say that is because I believe most injuries don't happen in the gym or in golf. They happen in like real life.
Yeah, I would say a lot of times people end up either one, if they have no idea and it just was a gradual thing, right? Usually if something's been building up over time and it does happen, say on the golf course or in everyday life, it probably wasn't just that one instance as far as I'm concerned. It was probably a thing over time that was happening and was, happening without any repercussions or symptoms. And then they did this one thing, which was the straw that broke the camel's back, basically. So it's not always that. I feel like people will go and they're like, well, I've been walking a lot and I relate that to golf, basically. And that's why it hurts. Or, I've been swinging a lot and now my shoulder is sore. When in reality, yeah, that may be contributing to it or maybe aggravated their symptoms, but probably had some underlying stuff going on, which wasn't aggravated before because they either one weren't taking care of it or, were doing other faulty things, up until that point, essentially.
Yeah. I've had so many clients who, they will tell me they have a shoulder injury and then you find out they have a 110-pound dog and they always walk the dog in the same arm and the dog pulls the arm, or, they sleep in a particular way where their elbow's always, well above their shoulder and they don't have that sort of mobility to sleep like that for 8 or 10 hours. Right. And causing issues. So it's usually, it feels like they blame it on the maybe 30 minutes of exercise that they did with me instead of the other issues. But the reason I bring that up is because I think it's important as, fitness professionals on any level, whether you're a personal trainer or above that we realize that most injuries and not most, but a lot of injuries can come, like you said, through repetition, through the day-to-day tasks and not necessarily through sort of the acute process.
Right.
So for those trainers or golfers who are looking to improve in the game, do you recommend TPI? Can you explain going through the process? How long does it take and all that it encompasses?
Yeah. So TPI, again, Titleist Performance Institute. I'm no way affiliated with them besides the fact that I'm certified through them. I would say that they are probably I would consider them the gold standard in terms of golf fitness and performance for sure. There are other certifications out there. I can't really speak to them. I haven't taken them or done anything with them, so hard for me to speak to that. But I would definitely recommend either I know of people, other fitness folks who have taken it just because they can understand the golf swing a little bit better for those clients that do golf or do any kind of rotational sport. TPI has kind of ventured into the tennis and the baseball world as well in a separate realm. But I've even heard of regular everyday golfers just want to get more knowledge so that they can help themselves play a little bit better. And I don't think everyone has to go through the level 1 certification first, which is a very broad overview of basically how the body is related to the swing, and they connect that body, they make that body swing connection, and they break that down, and you learn the screen basically. And then they go off into different tracks from there. So you can have a golf professional track, a fitness track, a medical track, all kinds of things. I do think it's definitely worth it if you want to go for it. Especially as a trainer or some other fitness professional. If you truly love the game and you want to just have a better idea of how the body is related to the swing, and you have no interest in training people or coaching people whatsoever, you're just an everyday golfer and you just want to learn more about it, go for it. I don't think that there's any wrong in doing that whatsoever.
Anecdotally, do you think it helped your game? And do you think about some of the sort of like the swing movements and the sort of kinesiology behind it when you're playing now?
It definitely helped me learn a little bit more of like why I might be doing certain things in the swing in terms of swing characteristics. And it has obviously helped me see that more so in clients and making that body swing connection. I tend to think that for myself, thinking less while I'm out there swinging a golf club is probably better, and not thinking about what I'm doing, and just try to, just be athletic, honestly, is probably what has helped me the most when I'm out there, because when I start thinking about too many things just go awry. But that's a whole different aspect.
Yeah, you and me both. I think a lot of people probably fall into that category. I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier. I should have asked you then, but when we talked about the separating sort of your thoracic rotation from the lower body rotation, is the main reason we do that test because we want to avoid golfers doing the sway motion where their entire body is moving, let's say, to the right during their backswing?
Yeah, there's a couple of reasons why we would want to do that. Again, to discern between if it's a mobility issue or if it's a stability issue, like are they able to just, again, disassociate from the rest of their body? But yeah, a lot of times there are a good amount of different swing characteristics that you can see that are, are related or can be related to certain body limitations. So if you can't disassociate your upper body from your lower body, again, you may stand up in your swing and have what's called like a flat shoulder plane or a loss of posture, basically. And you can imagine if you kind of lose your posture, that might be really hard to get the club back down on plane for an everyday amateur. This happens, a lot of professionals have some of these swing characteristics, but they're professional for the reason because they can make the right correction and they can do it consistently. But for us everyday, mortal folks, when we're playing golf, it's pretty hard to correct and be consistent every time when we're doing that. Same thing with the lower body. If you can't rotate your hips independently, that's the first thing that you should be starting the swing with on the downswing, essentially. And that's where a ton of power and force is created by rotating your hips and using the ground and turning through there. Because basically, this is in the TPI kind of course, but they teach it as essentially like a whip for the most part. And that's how you're going to gain the most power production and force for the most part, is basically by winding up and then releasing the other way. And it should be legs, upper body, arms and hands, and then club, basically. And it should be in that order in terms of how you're creating that kind of whip, basically. If you're kind of off, you're going to be lacking force production and you may have some inconsistencies with that. And they kind of promote that there is no one right way to swing. If you look at all the pros, there's tons of guys who have really wacky swings and guys who, what you may consider a traditional swing, but all of them have made millions of dollars with different swings. And so there's no right one way. There's an efficient way to swing, though. And that's kind of what they have studied and found.
Yeah, and that's the same thing for throwing a football. If you look at quarterbacks, I mean, Phillip Rivers is a very awkward motion, comparatively speaking, to Drew Brees, to Peyton Manning. They all throw a little bit differently, but there are certainly wrong ways to throw a football and there's wrong ways to swing, but there's not one right way. But people seem to find the most efficient plane of motion, for lack of a better term, for their body eventually, right? Through repetition and things of that nature. The one thing we didn't hit on is flexibility. Are you doing different exercises to help golfers through flexibility than you would for somebody else, or are these just traditional flexibility exercises?
I follow the same kind of process for most folks, depending on what they want. So, again, the screen will tell me what they want. I would say a common area, again, in most folks is hips, mid back. Even the lats can be kind of troublesome, especially for your lead arm as you're trying to get back into your backswing. If your lat is tight, you're going to have, limited ability to get back there potentially. And so my main process is I kind of, one, just change the input to the brain. So whether that's, foam rolling, some sort of soft tissue work first for just a short bit of time, then I like to do some sort of either passive or active stretching with the client. And they can do that on their own or with my assistance if needed, if I'm there, and then follow that up with definitely some sort of active drill to work into that new range of motion. I just follow that process for anyone who's looking to kind of gain mobility in any capacity, really, not just golfers. But again, a golfer, depending on the screen, will tell me certain areas to work on or not work on. And again, the hips, mid back, shoulders are the big ones for a golfer.
Do you recommend a particular warm-up, or do you yourself do a particular warm-up? We've seen them online with the club above your head and rotations and things of that nature, but are you looking for certain areas to warm up?
Are we talking like before we go play?
I'm talking before you go, let's say walk 18 and it's 7 a.m. and you're getting out there. What would be your warm-up, or what would you recommend to just your average general population?
Yeah, I do my warm-up that I recommend to everyone. I might give someone a specific one that's a little bit different if they're like my client, but I think this general one is pretty good. And it's basically just a general dynamic warm-up. So I like to do some leg swings kind of back and forth and side to side first. I like to do some kind of hip hinging with a lat stretch at the same time while holding my club kind of out in front of me, if you can kind of picture that. Mm-hmm. And then work on doing some like lunges forward with a little bit of rotation. So working on kind of that lower body stability while working on some separation through my upper body. Do that on both sides. I do some side bends side to side. And then really the other big one is just working on kind of not necessarily the golf swing, but working on that rotation, going down into that rotation, almost like you would do like a rotational shot put throw essentially. And really focusing on winding up, pushing through the ground, using my glutes to extend and getting through that rotation.
Yeah, that's great information. And for those who don't think it's important, I worked at a club, country club, where the web.com hosted an event there. And all those golfers would come into my gym in the morning and they would spend 45 minutes with their trainer rolling out and doing every dynamic warm-up you could possibly imagine before they went out on the course. I'm talking every single one of them. So it is now part of all of their routines. And if it's part of their routines and they're already in better shape than we are, it should be part of our routines.
Yeah, I think that's the one thing that we, as a casual viewer of the PGA on TV and whatnot, we just see these guys walk up to the first tee box and their name gets announced and they go play. And we don't see anything in the background. I mean, this is true for every sport for the most part. Unfortunately, you get to see more of it like in the warm up as pre-games are going on for football or basketball or stuff like that. You see, camera pans to people getting stretched and all those different things they're working out. But you never see that for golf, and they're in their little trailer or they go to the gym wherever they're at and they're working out for, 45 minutes doing something along those lines, whatever their individual routine is. And I think that just gives this false sense of notion that they just go out and play to a lot of people, even though that they know that they probably warm up and do certain things, but they just see them go. I also think a lot of times too, people just end up getting to the club too late, unfortunately, before their tee time. And they're like, oh crap, I just got to get out and get to the first tee before I miss my tee time. But I kid you not, that routine that I kind of just went over takes less than 5 minutes. And I would say doing that is way more important and beneficial than going to the range and hitting some balls or running to the putting green and just hitting a quick couple of putts before you go out and play.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, especially if you want to play the entire season, right? The whole purpose of this is injury prevention. So even if it's not helping you necessarily play better, hopefully what it's helping you do is not injure yourself when you get out on the course so that you can go out and shoot terribly the next time, just like you did today. But I also wanted to mention, and this is just sort of like asking you, do you come across like personal trainers necessarily, or as people in the fitness industry who recommend people to you? Do you work in conjunction with people? How do you work with your clients, and do you have like a networking set of people?
Yeah. Any other like personal trainer or some other physical therapists that are in the area that tend to not necessarily just like work with golfers. They know that I'm like the person in the area that does do that. One, I think for me, the biggest networking benefit that I have found and have tried to make these relationships are with the golf professionals in the area, especially the ones that are teaching, because they have the same mutual client basically, and they're the most invested in that person because they want them to do well, because they want them to come back for more lessons, right? And if you can kind of team up in that sort of way, in terms of saying like, hey, I can help this person get more mobile, get stronger, and get into the positions that you want them to get into, that's a great team dynamic and relationship. And that's definitely to what TPI preaches. They look at it as the team model, and look at the golf professional, the medical professional, and the fitness professional, and all three of you should work together to make your golfer the best that they could be.
Yeah, that's great information, and that's what I was getting at. And I think it's a lot of personal trainers, unfortunately, don't think that it is necessarily their job to go out and network with all of these people. Not only is it your job on your client's behalf, because they're going to get information relayed back to you through their other professionals and what's going on. You can work in conjunction, but you're doing yourself a disservice, because you're going to grow your business that way by making sure you send referrals to other people and they send it back to you. And then you're also not stepping on their toes. When I have a golfer and he has, like false leg length discrepancy, and I think his scapula is slightly rotated, I don't know what's causing what, I'm not going to deal with that. I'm going to send him to the physical therapist. The physical therapist is going to tell me what's wrong, and then I will, do those exercises accordingly. So that's why it's important.
Yeah, it's huge. I think, creating that team is initially can be the hard part, especially getting people on board, because I think sometimes, I haven't really run into this, but I know from others' experience kind of going and chatting with golf professionals that they're afraid that we're going to like steal their clients, or we're doing something that they're doing. And, for the most part, everyone that I know that's a fitness or a medical professional that has no training in the golf swing is not doing that. We know our limitations. And again, I don't think anyone would want me to coach the swing just based off of how I play. I do understand it, but I'm not the person that you want coaching how to swing and play better golf.
What is a common misconception amongst the general population, or maybe even fitness professionals, that golfers should do or that they don't do, and that's sort of like a groupthink rumor that gets spread around that you just want to sort of quash?
Yeah. Well, first, I'll say two things that come to mind. First one is that strength training and lifting weights will cause the golfer to lose flexibility. I hear that so many times from people, especially golfers. They're afraid that lifting weights will help them get too stiff and will help them maybe get too bulky, and then they won't be able to turn or rotate as much as they can, and again, lose their flexibility, and they're afraid that that's going to mess up their swing. When in reality, we know that that's not true whatsoever. And the last thing is basically you see all this on social media, and most of the time you see these professional athletes doing things on stability balls and balance trainers and stuff like that. There's nothing necessarily inherently wrong with that, but golf is not played on a unstable surface. Most sports are not. You should not be training people on those unless it's for, in my personal opinion, some sort of rehabilitation kind of aspect. But if it's truly a performance thing, there's no translation whatsoever.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. Almost every sports. Now, I'm a martial artist, so it's a little bit different, because you're on one leg a lot. So there's a lot of everting and inverting on your ankle when you're kicking and things. But for your average sport, you're almost never doing it. And it seems to be, it would be different if it's integrated in, as opposed to like, sometimes it's the sole focus of entire weeks of exercise.
Yeah.
And it seems like overkill.
Yeah. I can see it as an added like fun exercise at the end for someone, especially after they've mastered the basics. But if you're working with someone who's still, you know, again, an everyday golfer, probably who's still working on just trying to get fit and healthier, they don't need to be doing those things.
Yeah, they don't need to be watching Ricky's videos, 1 foot on a Bosu, like catching balls with his eyes closed, and trying to repeat that if they're shooting, a 93 and they're 46 years old with back problems.
Right. That is exactly the case.
Well, this was fantastic information, Joe. Why don't you give the listeners and the audience the links and any information to whether it's your Instagram, your website, and how they can find you, and also maybe how personal trainers can reach out to you directly if they have questions.
Yeah, probably the easiest way to reach out to me is I'm on Instagram. I'm on Instagram a lot. My handle is puredrive_golf-physio. My website is puredrivephysio.com, and you can email me at joe@puredrivephysio.com if you want to get in touch that way. Again, probably Instagram is the easiest way to get in contact with me.
Awesome, Joe. I hope to steal you down the road for another golf-related episode, and thanks for joining the TrulyFit Podcast.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.